The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in April. It was one of those spring days in Boston when the air still carried a bite of winter, but the magnolia trees were already beginning to bloom along Commonwealth Avenue. I was in my office on the 42nd floor of the Prudential Tower, reviewing contracts for a development project in Singapore, when my assistant Miranda brought in the mail. She placed a cream-colored envelope on my desk with a knowing look. The paper was expensive, embossed with gold lettering. I recognized my son's handwriting immediately. Brandon had always had that careful, precise script, a remnant of the years I'd spent drilling proper penmanship into him when he was young. I set down my reading glasses and opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a formal wedding invitation. Mr. Brandon Whitmore and Miss Sloane Fairchild request the honor of your presence at their marriage ceremony on Saturday, the 15th of June, at the Fairchild Estate in Newport, Rhode Island. Newport. Of course. The Fairchild family wouldn't dream of having the wedding anywhere less prestigious. I'd only met them once, briefly, when Brandon first introduced Sloane to me 6 months ago. They were old money, the kind of family that traced their lineage back to the Mayflower and never let anyone forget it. Sloane herself was a striking woman of 35, with the kind of sharp features and cold beauty that reminded me of ice sculptures. She worked in philanthropy, which, as far as I could tell, meant organizing charity galas and serving on boards funded by her family's trust. She had barely spoken to me during that first meeting, answering my questions with monosyllables while checking her phone. Brandon, my 43-year-old son, had been different since meeting her, more distant. Our weekly dinners had become monthly, then occasional. Our phone calls grew shorter. When I asked about his work, he managed a hedge fund downtown. He gave vague answers. When I asked about Sloane, he changed the subject, but he was getting married, and I was his mother. Whatever reservations I had, I would put on my best dress, pin on my brightest smile, and celebrate his happiness. That's what mothers do. I called him that evening. He answered after several rings, his voice distracted. "Hi, Mom. I'm guessing you got the invitation." "I did. Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you." There was a pause. "Thanks. Look, I can't talk long. We're finalizing seating arrangements and there's a lot to coordinate. Of course, I just wanted to say I'll be there. And if you need any help with anything, the Fairchilds have event planners handling everything. But thanks." Another pause. I wanted to say so much. I wanted to ask if he was truly happy, if Sloane treated him well, if he'd thought about the prenuptial agreement I hoped he'd insisted on. But instead, I said, "I'm proud of you, Brandon. Your father would be too." The mention of David, my late husband, seemed to soften him slightly. "I know, Mom. I wish he could be here." "So do I, sweetheart. So do I." After we hung up, I sat in my study for a long time, looking at the photograph on my desk. It showed the three of us, David, Brandon, and me, taken 20 years ago on a beach in Cape Cod. Brandon was laughing, his arm around his father's shoulders. David was looking at me with that expression of complete adoration he'd always had, and I was smiling, genuinely happy, not yet knowing that within 5 years I'd be a widow. David Whitmore had been my partner in every sense. We'd built Whitmore International together, starting with nothing but a small import business and growing it into a multinational logistics company. When he died of a sudden heart attack at 59, I thought I'd die too. The grief was suffocating, all-consuming, but I had Brandon to think about, and I had a company to run, so I swallowed my tears, put on my armor, and kept moving forward. That was 15 years ago. In those 15 years, I'd tripled the company's value, expanded into 12 new countries, and established myself as one of the most respected businesswomen in New England. I'd also become, in the eyes of some, hard, cold, too focused on work. I'd heard the whispers at business functions, that Beatrice Whitmore was brilliant but ruthless, successful but lonely. Let them whisper. They didn't know what it took to survive in a man's world at 69. They didn't understand that sometimes armor becomes so heavy you can't take it off, even when you want to. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy. I had a major deal closing in Frankfurt and needed to be there in person. I also had to find something appropriate to wear. Mother of the groom attire for a Newport society wedding was its own particular challenge. Miranda helped me choose a dress, elegant navy blue silk, with a matching jacket and tasteful jewelry. Not too flashy, not too plain, appropriate for a woman my age who also happened to be worth over $200 million. "You look beautiful," Miranda said when I tried it on. She'd been my assistant for 12 years and had become something of a friend, though I tried not to blur those lines too much. "I look old," I said, studying my reflection. My hair was silver white now, cut in a short, professional style. My face showed every one of my 69 years, lines around my eyes, a certain softness under my chin. But my eyes, a sharp gray blue, still held that intensity that made subordinates nervous and competitors wary. "You look distinguished. There's a difference. Tell that to my son's fiancée." I don't think she was particularly impressed during our first meeting. Miranda gave me a long look. "Mrs. Whitmore, can I speak freely? When have you ever not? I've met Miss Fairchild twice now, when she's come to the office with Brandon. And I have to say, there's something off about her. The way she looks at things, like she's calculating their value. The way she treats people she considers beneath her. I watched her snap at the parking attendant like he was trash. Brandon loves her. That has to count for something. Does he? Or does he love what she represents? Access to that world he's always felt shut out of. Her words struck a nerve. Brandon had always been sensitive about his background. Yes, we had money, significant money, but it was new money, earned money. We didn't have the generations of wealth and social position that families like the Fairchilds possessed. David and I had both come from working-class families. We'd built everything from scratch. I'd always thought Brandon was proud of that, but maybe I'd been wrong. The day before the wedding, I drove to Newport. The Fairchild estate was stunning, a sprawling mansion overlooking the ocean, with manicured gardens and a sense of history in every stone. The kind of place that whispered, "You don't belong here unless your family has belonged here for centuries." I checked into a hotel in town. The wedding planner had informed me, through a terse email, that accommodations for the immediate family would be at the estate, but that other guests would need to arrange their own lodging. The message was clear. Despite being the groom's mother, I was categorized as an other guest. That evening, I had dinner alone at a seafood restaurant overlooking the harbor. My phone rang. It was Brandon. "Mom, just wanted to make sure you got here okay?" I did. "The drive was lovely. How are you feeling?" "Nervous. Terrified," he admitted. And for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Mom, I want to thank you. For everything. For raising me. For supporting me. For building something I could be proud of." Tears stung my eyes. "You don't need to thank me, sweetheart. Being your mother has been the greatest privilege of my life. I know I haven't been around much lately. Sloane's family has a lot of events, and there's been wedding planning, and you don't need to explain. You're starting your own family now. That's how it should be." But even as I said it, something cold settled in my chest. A premonition, perhaps, or just a mother's instinct that something wasn't right. "I'll see you tomorrow," Brandon said. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." After hanging up, I sat watching the boats in the harbor as twilight fell. Tomorrow my son would marry a woman I barely knew, joining a family that clearly saw me as an outsider. But I would hold my head high. I would smile. I would be gracious. I had no idea that within 24 hours, that resolve would be tested in ways I never imagined. Chapter 2. The Ceremony. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, with that perfect June sunshine that makes everything seem possible. I dressed carefully in my navy silk, applied my makeup with precision, and examined myself in the mirror. I looked like what I was, a successful, confident woman who had earned every gray hair and every wrinkle. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock. I arrived at the estate at 2 as instructed. A valet took my car, and a young woman with a clipboard directed guests toward the garden where the ceremony would take place. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Beatrice Whitmore, mother of the groom." Her head snapped up, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Surprise, confusion. She checked her list twice. Yes, you're here, if you'll follow me." She led me through the house, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers and paintings that belonged in museums, and out to the garden. Rows of white chairs faced an arch covered in roses. It was beautiful in that carefully orchestrated way that required a dozen people and thousands of dollars. "You'll be in the 3rd row," the young woman said, pointing. I stopped. The third row? I'm the mother of the groom. Yes, I know, but those are the seating arrangements we were given. The mother of the groom traditionally sits in the first row. Everyone knows this. It's not about ego. It's about honoring the relationship, the role. But before I could argue, another voice called out, "Beatrice, there you are!" It was Sloane's mother, Priscilla Fairchild, gliding toward me in a gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. She was a tall, thin woman in her early 60s, with that particular brand of wasp elegance that came from generations of privilege. Priscilla, I said, forcing a smile. Everything looks beautiful, doesn't it? We've worked so hard to make it perfect. Now, I understand there's some confusion about seating. The first row is reserved for immediate family, of course. But don't worry. You'll have a lovely view from where you are. The dismissal in her tone was unmistakable. I wasn't considered immediate family. Not really. I was just the woman who happened to give birth to the groom. A biological detail. Nothing more. I see, I said, keeping my voice level. And has Brandon approved this arrangement? Brandon understands how these things work, Priscilla said smoothly. He's part of our family now, and we have certain traditions. I'm sure you understand. What I understood was that I was being deliberately diminished, put in my place, reminded that despite my success, despite everything I'd built, I would never be one of them. Of course, I said. Thank you for clarifying. I took my seat in the third row, between people I didn't know. Around me, guests whispered and laughed, air-kissing and name-dropping. Old money recognizing old money. I was a stranger in a foreign land. When the ceremony began, I watched my son walk down the aisle with his father's confident stride. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, his dark hair touched with gray at the temples. 43 years old, and I could still see the toddler who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, convinced they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. Sloane followed, a vision in white lace and diamonds. She was objectively beautiful, but when I looked at her face, I saw nothing soft, nothing vulnerable, just satisfaction, the look of someone who'd acquired something valuable. The ceremony was traditional, formal, with vows that spoke of duty and family and legacy. When they were pronounced husband and wife, everyone applauded. I clapped too, blinking back tears that were equal parts joy and sorrow. During the receiving line, Brandon hugged me briefly. Thanks for coming, Mom. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Sloane extended her hand for a formal handshake. Thank you for attending, Beatrice. Not Mom. Not even Mrs. Whitmore, just Beatrice, as if I were a colleague or distant acquaintance. Congratulations, Sloane. I wish you both every happiness. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. And how kind. The reception was in a massive tent on the lawn, with chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and tables draped in silk. It was like something out of a movie. Beautiful, elegant, and utterly impersonal. I found my assigned seat, table 12, near the back, away from the head table where Brandon and Sloane sat with their wedding party, away from the family tables. I was surrounded by distant cousins of the Fairchilds and business associates of Sloane's father. The woman next to me introduced herself as Millicent. How do you know the couple? I'm Brandon's mother. Her eyebrows rose. Oh, I'm so sorry. I just assumed you were a business connection. Unusual seating arrangement for the mother of the groom. Yes, I said quietly. It is. As dinner was served, courses upon courses of food more decorative than satisfying, I watched Brandon at the head table. Sloane kept touching his arm, leaning into him, playing the perfect bride. And Brandon seemed happy, or at least, he was smiling. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe my instincts were off. Maybe Sloane truly loved him. And this was just the awkwardness of merging two very different worlds. Then dessert was served, and everything changed. Chapter 3. The Note. A young server approached my table carrying small plates of wedding cake. As she set one in front of me, she leaned down slightly and whispered, "There's a note under your plate, ma'am." I looked at her, confused. She wouldn't meet my eyes, just moved quickly to the next guest. I lifted the edge of my dessert plate. There, on the white linen tablecloth, was a folded piece of cream-colored paper, the same expensive stationery as the wedding invitation. With a sense of dread, I unfolded it. The handwriting was feminine, looping and confident. Beatrice. After dinner, please proceed to the kitchen. That's where you belong. Servants dine in the back. We wouldn't want you to be uncomfortable among the guests. S. I read it 3 times, certain I must be misunderstanding. But no, the message was clear. Sloane, my new daughter-in-law, was banishing me to the kitchen like a servant. My hands trembled slightly as I refolded the note. Around me, people laughed and clinked glasses and celebrated. No one noticed the woman in the 3rd row, in the back table, holding a piece of paper that shattered what remained of her hope for this day. Part of me wanted to crumple the note, throw it away, pretend I'd never received it, but a larger part, the part that had survived widowhood, business betrayals, and countless attempts to diminish me, knew exactly what I needed to do. I pulled out my phone from my small clutch purse. My hands were steady now, fueled by something cold and focused. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Werner Hoffmann, CEO of Hoffmann Industries in Germany. I'd been negotiating with Werner for 8 months. His company wanted to expand into Asian markets, and he needed Whitmore International's expertise and connections. The contract we'd drawn up was worth 20 million euros over 5 years, a significant deal for both companies. The contract was sitting on Werner's desk, waiting for my final authorization to proceed. 1 word from me, and it would move forward. 1 word from me, and it would die. I typed out a message. Werner, after careful consideration, I've decided to terminate our agreement, effective immediately. My legal team will send official documentation Monday. Best regards, B. Whitmore. My finger hovered over the send button for just a moment. This wasn't just about the money, though 20 million euros was substantial. It was about the message, about showing Brandon and Sloane and everyone in this tent that Beatrice Whitmore was not someone to be dismissed, insulted, or treated as lesser. I pressed send. Then I stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the head table. Every eye in the tent seemed to follow me. Or perhaps that was just my imagination, my awareness that I was about to do something that would change everything. The band had just finished a song. There was a lull in the noise, a moment of relative quiet. Perfect. I picked up a glass of champagne from a passing server's tray and gently tapped it with my fork. The crystal ring echoed through the tent. Excuse me. Everyone, may I have your attention, please? Conversations died. Faces turned toward me. I saw Brandon's expression, confused, uncertain. Sloane's face was a mask of irritation, as if I were an uninvited guest making a scene. I apologize for the interruption, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the silence. But as the mother of the groom, I'd like to say a few words. Priscilla Fairchild half rose from her seat, alarm on her face. But what could she do? Stop the mother of the groom from giving a toast. That would be the real scandal. I smiled warmly at the crowd. These people, with their old money and older prejudices, who'd looked down their noses at me all day. Brandon, sweetheart, come here for a moment. He stood slowly, looking like he wanted to sink through the floor. But he came, years of ingrained obedience to his mother overriding his hesitation. I want everyone here to know something about my son, I began, putting my arm around him. He was stiff beneath my touch. Brandon Whitmore is a good man. He's intelligent, hardworking, and loyal. He got those qualities from his father, David, who built an empire from nothing, from absolutely nothing. I paused, letting that sink in. The emphasis on nothing was deliberate. David and I started with one small import shop in South Boston. We worked 18-hour days. We lived in a studio apartment. We ate ramen noodles for dinner more nights than I can count. But we built something. Together. Brandon's face had gone pale. He knew me well enough to recognize the steel beneath my pleasant tone. When David died, he left Brandon and me with a company worth $50 million. Not bad for 2 people who started with nothing, wouldn't you say? Polite murmurs around the tent. But that was 15 years ago. 15 years during which I've grown Whitmore International into what it is today. We now operate in 30 countries. We facilitate billions of dollars in international trade annually, and the company is currently valued at $220 million. Now I had everyone's attention. Even the old money families couldn't help but respect that number. I tell you this not to brag, but to make a point. My son comes from hard work, from determination, from people who built things rather than inherited them. And I've always been proud of that. Proud of him. I turned to look at Sloane, who was still seated at the head table, her face frozen in a false smile. Today, I received a note from my new daughter-in-law. It suggested I should dine in the kitchen, as that's where I belong. Where servants belong. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Brandon's face drained of all color. He looked between me and Sloane, confusion and horror warring in his expression. Now, I'm not one to make a scene, I continued calmly, but I think it's important for everyone here to understand something. I am not a servant. I am the woman who built an empire. I am the woman who will, upon my death, leave my son a fortune. But I am also the woman who, when disrespected, takes action. I held up my phone, showing the sent message to Werner. 5 minutes ago, I terminated a €20 million contract. That's approximately $23 million, for those calculating. I did this because I will not tolerate being treated as less than I am. Not by anyone, not ever. The silence in the tent was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. So I want to make something very clear to everyone here. You can have your old money, your family names that go back centuries, your estates and your traditions, but never, ever mistake those things for actual power. Real power comes from what you build, what you create, what you earn, and on that measure, I outrank everyone in this tent. I set down my champagne glass and turned to Brandon, who looked like he might be sick. And I love you, sweetheart. I always will. But I will not be disrespected in the name of your social climbing. When you're ready to remember who you are and where you came from, you know where to find me. I kissed his cheek gently, then walked out of that tent with my head held high, leaving behind a shocked silence and a room full of people who would never underestimate Beatrice Whitmore again. Mom, Chapter 4, The Aftermath. I didn't go back to my hotel. Instead, I got in my car and drove north along the coast, windows down despite my expensive hairdo, letting the salt air whip through the car. I drove for 2 hours, until I reached a small beach town I'd visited once with David, decades ago. I parked overlooking the ocean and finally allowed myself to feel everything I'd been holding back. The hurt, the betrayal, the crushing disappointment that my son, my beautiful, brilliant son, had married a woman who saw me as something to be ashamed of. My phone started ringing almost immediately after I'd left the reception. Brandon called 17 times. I didn't answer. Priscilla Fairchild called twice. I blocked her number. Even Werner Hoffman called, bewildered and concerned about my sudden message. I turned off my phone. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I had no plan, no strategy. I just walked away from my son's wedding after humiliating him publicly. I'd torpedoed a major business deal out of pure spite. I'd burned bridges with the kind of family that could make things difficult in certain social and business circles. And yet, as I sat there watching the waves crash against the rocks, I felt lighter than I had in months. There's something freeing about hitting rock bottom, about making the choice to value yourself over keeping the peace. I'd spent so much of my life being diplomatic, strategic, playing the long game. And where had it gotten me? Seated at table 12, receiving notes that told me to eat in the kitchen. No more. As twilight fell, I turned my phone back on. The voicemails and texts flooded in. I ignored most of them, but there was one from Miranda that caught my attention. Mrs. Whitmore, I don't know what happened, but half the business world is calling the office asking if you're okay. Werner Hoffman is particularly concerned. Call me when you can. And another from my lawyer, Theodore Breslin. Beatrice, whatever you did at that wedding is trending on social media. Someone filmed your toast. We need to talk damage control. Call me ASAP. Trending? Oh God. Of course someone had filmed it. There were probably 300 phones in that tent. I called Theodore. He answered immediately. Beatrice, what the hell happened? I was disrespected at my son's wedding. I responded proportionally. Proportionally? You terminated a €20 million deal and gave a speech calling out old money families for being worthless. It's all over Twitter and Instagram. The business press has already picked it up. What are they saying? That you're either having a breakdown or you're the most badass businesswoman in America. It's split about 50-50. Despite everything, I laughed. Oh, what do you think, Theodore? I think you've never done anything without a reason. But I also think you need to be prepared for consequences. The Fairchilds are old money with long memories. Sloane's father sits on several boards. They'll try to make things difficult for you. Let them try. I've been dealing with men who underestimated me for 50 years. I'm not afraid of the Fairchilds. And Brandon, that question silenced me. Brandon, my son, the one person I'd hoped would always be on my side, no matter what. I don't know, Theodore. I honestly don't know. After hanging up, I found a small motel with vacancy and checked in for the night. The room was clean but basic, a far cry from the luxury I'd become accustomed to. But there was something honest about it. Real. I lay in bed, still in my navy silk dress, and finally listened to one of Brandon's voicemails. Mom, what? I don't understand. Why would you do that? You humiliated me in front of everyone. Sloane is devastated. Her family is furious. I need to understand why. His voice broke on the last word, and hearing that pain nearly undid me. But then I remembered the note, the casual cruelty of it, and I steeled myself. I called him back. He answered on the first ring. Mom, where are you? I'm safe. That's all you need to know right now. Mom, please, come back. We can fix this. Sloane says it was a misunderstanding, that she never sent that note. Brandon, stop. Don't lie for her. I saw her handwriting. I received the note. And more importantly, you need to ask yourself why your first instinct is to defend the woman who insulted your mother, rather than to defend your mother. She's my wife now. Mom, you have to what? Choose? Brandon, loving your wife doesn't mean accepting her cruelty toward others. It doesn't mean watching her diminish the woman who sacrificed everything to raise you. That's not fair. You don't know her like I do. Then tell me who she is. Because from where I'm standing, I see a woman who seated me in the third row, who put me at table 12, who sent me a note telling me to eat in the kitchen because I'm beneath her. If that's not who she is, then explain it to me. Silence on the other end. I thought so, I said softly. Brandon, I love you. That will never change. But I won't pretend that what happened today was acceptable. And until you can acknowledge that, until you can stand up for what's right, instead of just keeping the peace, we don't have much to say to each other. Mom, don't do this. Don't make me choose. I'm not making you choose, sweetheart. I'm simply choosing myself. There's a difference. I hung up before he could respond, before I could hear him cry, before my resolve could crack. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in the darkness of that motel room, thinking about paths not taken, about the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become. When David died, I'd buried my grief in work. I'd armored myself in success. And somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that I was human, that I had limits, that I deserved respect not just as a businesswoman but as a person. Tomorrow, I'd deal with the fallout. I'd rebuild what needed rebuilding, repair what could be repaired. But tonight, in this quiet room far from the world of wealth and social climbing and family betrayals, I was just Beatrice, a 69-year-old woman who'd had enough. And that was enough. Chapter 5, Going Viral by Morning. The video of my toast had 17 million views. I discovered this when I finally checked social media over breakfast at a small diner down the street from the motel. Someone, probably multiple someones, had filmed my entire speech and posted it online. The video was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, even LinkedIn. The comments were polarizing. Some people called me a hero. This is what standing up for yourself looks like. Queen behavior. Never let them treat you like you're less than. Others thought I was cruel. Imagine ruining your son's wedding like this. She seems unhinged. This is what happens when successful women can't handle not being the center of attention. But the business world's reaction interested me most. Articles were appearing in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Bloomberg, with headlines like, Tech Titan terminates $20 million deal at son's wedding, and Beatrice Whitmore shows why she's not to be crossed. My phone rang. It was Werner Hoffman. Beatrice, I've been trying to reach you. I must understand. What happened? I took a deep breath. Werner was a good man, and his company didn't deserve to be collateral damage in my personal drama. Werner, I apologize. Yesterday was complicated. I acted impulsively, and your company shouldn't suffer for that. Impulsively? Beatrice, in 8 months of negotiations, you've never been impulsive. What really happened? So I told him. About the note. About being treated like a servant at my own son's wedding. About reaching a breaking point where I had to either accept the disrespect or take a stand. There was a long silence when I finished. "May I speak candidly?" Werner asked. "Please." "When we began negotiations, I did research on you. A widow who took over her husband's company and grew it exponentially. Very impressive. But I wondered if perhaps your reputation was exaggerated. If maybe you'd been lucky or had good advisors. Yesterday, you showed me exactly who Beatrice Whitmore is. Someone who will not be diminished, no matter the cost. Someone who values her dignity over 20 million euros. Is that a compliment or a criticism? It's both. And it's why I'm calling to say that if you're still interested, I'd like to move forward with our contract. I want to work with someone who has that kind of spine." I was speechless. "However," Werner continued, "I would like to renegotiate one thing. Instead of a 5-year contract, let's make it 7, and let's increase the value to 25 million euros. Consider the extra 5 million a bonus for teaching me what real power looks like." After hanging up with Werner, I sat in stunned silence. I'd thrown away a major deal in anger, and somehow it had come back bigger. Life was strange sometimes. My phone rang again. This time it was Miranda. "Mrs. Whitmore, where are you? The office is going crazy. We've had 53 calls this morning from potential clients who saw the video. Everyone wants to work with the woman who walked away from 20 million. You're joking." "I'm not. Apparently, publicly demonstrating that you can't be bought or intimidated is very attractive to certain sectors. We also have interview requests from every major business publication. 3 morning shows want you on. And somehow Oprah's people reached out." "Oprah?" "Something about authentic female empowerment. I'm still processing it myself. This wasn't how I'd expected things to go. I'd imagined professional consequences, burned bridges, a damaged reputation. Instead, I was being celebrated for the very thing I'd thought might destroy me. "Set up a meeting with our PR team for tomorrow," I said. "We need to strategize how to handle this. And Miranda, thank you for holding down the fort. Always. But Mrs. Whitmore, how are you really doing?" It was the first time anyone had asked that question. Not how's the business, not what's your next move, but how are you? "Honestly, I don't know yet. I'll let you know when I figure it out." I spent the rest of the day driving back to Boston, thinking about what came next. The business side seemed to be handling itself, better than handling itself, actually thriving. But the personal side, that was more complicated. Brandon hadn't called again, but Sloane had, 3 times. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail on the 3rd attempt. "Beatrice, this is Sloane. I think we need to clear the air. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. That note wasn't meant the way you interpreted it. It was a joke. A very poorly executed joke. I never meant to insult you. Please call me so we can resolve this before it damages Brandon's relationship with you permanently." A joke. She was calling it a joke. I saved the voicemail, not to respond to, but as evidence, because gaslighting was a tactic I recognized all too well from my years in business, and I wouldn't let it work on me now. When I arrived back at my penthouse in Boston's Back Bay, I found a delivery waiting. A massive bouquet of white roses with a card. "Mother, please call me. We need to talk. I love you. Brandon." White roses. The flowers David used to bring me. Brandon remembered. I set them on my dining table and looked out at the city skyline. Boston in June was beautiful, all the trees green and the harbor sparkling in the distance. The city had been my home for 40 years. I'd built my life here, raised my son here, buried my husband here, and now I stood at a crossroads. I could reach out to Brandon, try to mend things, find some middle ground, or I could hold firm, maintain my boundaries, and accept that the relationship might never be the same. The old Beatrice would have called him immediately, would have soothed hurt feelings, made peace, smoothed things over. But the old Beatrice had also sat at table 12 without complaint, had accepted dismissal after dismissal, had stayed silent when she should have spoken. This new version of me, or perhaps the version I'd been suppressing for years, she needed time. Time to think, to feel, to decide what she truly wanted rather than what everyone else needed from her. So I didn't call Brandon that night. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on my balcony, and watched the city lights flicker on one by one as darkness fell. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow I'd face whatever consequences remained. Tomorrow I'd start rebuilding. But tonight, I was just going to sit here and acknowledge that standing up for myself, really, truly standing up, felt terrifying and empowering in equal measure. And that maybe, just maybe, I'd done the right thing. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. The week after the wedding was surreal. The video had now accumulated over 40 million views, and I'd become, for better or worse, a symbol. Some saw me as an icon of female empowerment. Others saw me as a cautionary tale of what happens when wounded ego meets too much power. I didn't care about either interpretation. What mattered was setting the record straight and moving forward. On Tuesday, I gave my first interview, not to Oprah or the morning shows, but to a respected journalist named Patricia Caldwell, who'd covered the business world for 30 years. We met in a quiet corner of a cafe in Cambridge, away from the media circus. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for agreeing to talk," Patricia began, setting her recorder on the table. "And I'll be direct. Some people are calling you petty for what you did at your son's wedding. What's your response?" "Some people haven't been told to eat in the kitchen at their own child's wedding," I replied calmly. "Patricia, I've spent 50 years in business. I've been called too aggressive, too emotional, too old, too calculating. I've had men half my age try to talk over me in meetings. I've had deals fall through because the other side didn't feel comfortable working with a woman. Through all of that, I maintained professionalism. I picked my battles. I played the game. So what changed at the wedding? I realized I was done playing. This wasn't a boardroom where I could leverage my position or outmaneuver someone. This was my son's wedding, where I should have been honored and cherished. Instead, I was deliberately marginalized and insulted, and in that moment, I had to choose, accept it silently, or show everyone in that tent that Beatrice Whitmore cannot and will not be diminished. Even at the cost of your relationship with your son. That question hurt, but I didn't flinch. I hope it doesn't come to that. But I've learned that relationships built on one person constantly conceding, constantly absorbing disrespect to keep the peace, aren't real relationships. They're performances, and I'm too old and too tired to perform anymore. The interview ran in the weekend edition, and the response was overwhelming. My email and office phone were flooded with messages from women. Not just business women, but teachers, nurses, secretaries, retirees, thanking me for saying what they'd always wanted to say. One email in particular stuck with me. It was from a woman named Eleanor, 67 years old. "Dear Mrs. Whitmore, I've spent 40 years as a high school teacher. I've raised 3 children, buried a husband, and survived 2 bouts of cancer. Through it all, I've been told to be nice, be agreeable, don't make waves. I've swallowed my anger so many times I forgot what my real voice sounded like. Watching your speech made me cry, not from sadness, but from recognition. You showed me what it looks like to value yourself even when everyone around you is telling you not to. Thank you for reminding me that our dignity matters. With admiration, Eleanor." I read that email 3 times, tears running down my face. This was bigger than a family drama or a business decision. It touched something universal about what happens to women as we age, how we're expected to shrink, to defer, to gracefully accept our decreasing relevance. Well, I refused. On Thursday, I had dinner with my oldest friend, Margaret Chen. We'd known each other since college, had supported each other through marriages, careers, widowhood, and everything life threw at us. Margaret didn't mince words. "Beatrice, I've known you for 48 years. I watched you build an empire, raise a son alone after David died, and navigate a world designed to exclude you. But I've never seen you look this tired. I am tired, Maggie. So tired. Then rest. Step back from the business. Hire someone to run it day to day. You've proven everything you need to prove. It's not about proving anything anymore. It's about, I don't know, purpose, maybe. The business is all I have now. That's not true. You have me. You have friends. You could travel, take up painting, join a book club. You don't have to define yourself by your work, but I do. It's who I am." Margaret reached across the table and took my hand. "No, honey, it's what you do. Who you are is a woman who loves fiercely, who fights for what's right, who refuses to be broken. The business is just one expression of that. There are others." Her words stayed with me long after dinner ended. That night, Brandon finally came to see me. I heard his knock at my door around 9 o'clock. When I opened it, he looked haggard. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and he entered my home, his childhood home, though I'd moved to this penthouse after he graduated from college. He walked to the window, looking out at the city, his back to me. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, "about what you said, about what happened at the wedding, about a lot of things." I waited, letting him find his words. "I convinced myself you were overreacting, that Sloane couldn't possibly have meant it the way you took it, that you were just, I don't know, uncomfortable with the Fairchild world and lashing out. And now," he turned to face me, and I saw tears on his cheeks. "And now, I've been living with Sloane for a week as her husband instead of her boyfriend. And I'm seeing things I didn't want to see before. The way she talks about people she considers beneath her. The way she treats service staff. The way she talks about you when she thinks I'm not really listening. What does she say about me? That you're nouveau riche trying to buy respect. That you're jealous of her family's position. That you're a social climber who's bitter about being excluded from old money circles." He paused. "She called you a bitter old woman playing at being important." The words stung, even though I'd suspected as much. "And what do you think?" I asked softly. "I think I've been a coward. I think I was so desperate to be accepted by the Fairchilds, to be part of that world, that I let them treat us, as less than, and I'm ashamed." "Brandon, no, let me finish. Dad built something incredible from nothing. You took it and made it even more incredible. Our family, our name, our success. It's all real. It's earned. And I've been acting like it's something to be embarrassed about, like we need the Fairchild's approval to matter. We don't." He crossed the room and took my hands. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. For the seating arrangement, for not defending you, for believing Sloane's version over yours, for everything." I pulled him into a hug, this man who was still, in so many ways, my little boy. "I forgive you, sweetheart. Of course I forgive you. I don't know what I'm going to do about Sloane, about the marriage. That's a decision only you can make. But Brandon, whatever you decide, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll never again let anyone, not a spouse, not friends, not business associates, make you feel ashamed of who you are and where you come from. Your father and I built something beautiful. You come from love and hard work and sacrifice. That's nothing to apologize for. I promise." We talked for hours that night, really talked in a way we hadn't in years. He told me about the cracks in his marriage that were already showing, how Sloane was furious about the viral video, not because it hurt her, but because it damaged her family's image, how her parents were pressuring him to make me issue a public apology. "They want you to say it was a misunderstanding, that you overreacted, that you're sorry for causing a scene. I'm not doing that. I know, and I don't want you to. Mom, I need time to figure things out. With Sloane, with my life. But whatever happens, I want you to know, I'm on your side. I should have been from the beginning." After he left, I felt lighter, but also infinitely sad, because I knew, with a mother's certainty, that Brandon's marriage was already over. It had been a mistake from the start, built on his insecurities and her calculations rather than genuine love. And there was nothing I could do to save him from the pain that was coming. All I could do was be there to help pick up the pieces. Chapter 7. Consequences. The next month was brutal for Brandon. I watched from a distance as his marriage imploded in slow motion. It started with small things. Sloane refused to attend business functions with him, embarrassed by the association with that video. The Fairchilds began excluding him from family events, punishment for his mother's transgression. Sloane's friends, that tight-knit circle of trust fund socialites, stopped inviting them to parties. Brandon tried to make it work. He really did. But Sloane wasn't interested in compromise or growth. She wanted him to force me to apologize publicly, to disavow my actions, to prove his loyalty to the Fairchild family over his own. He refused. She gave me an ultimatum, he told me over lunch one day in July. "Either you apologize and admit you were wrong, or she's filing for divorce. I won't apologize for standing up for myself, Brandon. I know, and I wouldn't ask you to. I just want you to know what's coming. How do you feel about that?" He was quiet for a long time. Relieved, actually. These past weeks have shown me that I don't know the woman I married. Or maybe I did know, and I just didn't want to admit it. Either way, I can't stay in a marriage where loving my mother is seen as a betrayal. The divorce was filed in August. It was ugly. The Fairchilds had power and connections, and they used both. Stories began appearing in society pages, painting Brandon as a social climber who'd married above his station, and his mother as a crude businesswoman who'd never understood true class. But for every negative story, there were 3 positive ones. My business continued to thrive. The Werner Hoffman deal closed successfully. New contracts poured in from companies that wanted to work with the woman who couldn't be bought. I established a scholarship fund in David's name for first-generation college students from working-class backgrounds. The response was overwhelming. In 2 months, we'd funded 40 scholarships. But through all the professional success, I ached for Brandon. Divorce is painful under any circumstances, but this one was particularly cruel. Sloane and her family wielded their social influence like a weapon, attempting to ostracize him from the circles he'd worked so hard to enter. One evening in September, he showed up at my door looking devastated. She told everyone I'm impotent. That's why we never had children. It's all over social media, whispered at parties. It's a complete lie, but no one cares. My protective mama bear instincts roared to life. Give me one day. Mom, what are you going to do? I'm going to remind the Fairchilds why you don't go to war with Beatrice Whitmore. The next morning, I had Theodore, my lawyer, make some calls. It turned out that Sloane's father, Christopher Fairchild, sat on the board of 3 charitable foundations. Foundations that received significant annual donations from Whitmore International. I instructed Theodore to inform Mr. Fairchild that unless the smear campaign against Brandon stopped immediately, I would be withdrawing all financial support from those foundations and making it known publicly why I was doing so. Additionally, I discovered that the Fairchild Family Trust Fund, the source of their wealth, was heavily invested in several tech companies whose supply chains depended on logistics services provided by firms like mine. One conversation with the right CEOs, explaining that I was reevaluating partnerships in light of personal attacks from families connected to current business associates, and suddenly, the Fairchilds had problems. Within 48 hours, Christopher Fairchild called me. Mrs. Whitmore, I think there's been an unfortunate escalation of hostilities that serves neither of our families. Mr. Fairchild, there were no hostilities from my end until your daughter decided to wage a campaign of character assassination against my son. Sloane is upset. The divorce, the publicity. Sloane wrote me a note telling me to eat in the kitchen because that's where servants belong. I don't care if she's upset. I care that she stops attacking my son, or I will use every resource at my disposal to make your family's life very difficult. Are we clear? There was a pause. Crystal. Clear, Mrs. Whitmore. Good. And Mr. Fairchild, the next time your family decides to play games with mine, remember that your money is old, but mine is current. Old money can run out. Current money keeps growing. The smear campaign stopped overnight. Brandon was amazed. How did you do that? I reminded them that power isn't about bloodlines or social position. It's about leverage, and I have considerably more leverage than they do, but I took no pleasure in it, because the truth was, none of this should have been necessary. We shouldn't have been at war with Sloane's family. Brandon should have been allowed to marry whomever he wanted without it turning into a class conflict. The whole situation was exhausting. In October, 6 months after the wedding, the divorce was finalized. Sloane got nothing. There'd been a prenup, thank God, that Brandon had insisted on despite her tears and protests. She moved back to her parents' estate in Newport, and Brandon moved into a smaller apartment in Boston's South End. He seemed lighter, younger, like he'd shed a weight he'd been carrying for years. I feel like I can breathe again, he told me over dinner at my place one night. Like I've been performing for so long, I forgot what being myself felt like. That's what the wrong relationship does to you. It makes you smaller. The irony is, I thought being with Sloane would make me bigger. More important, I thought her family's acceptance would prove I'd made it. And now I realize I'd already made it. We made it. You and Dad and me. We built something real. Something that mattered. I didn't need the Fairchild's approval. I never did. That conversation meant more to me than any business success ever could. But that night, after Brandon left, I sat in my study and cried, not tears of happiness, but of grief, because my son had learned these lessons, had grown and changed, but the price had been so high. A failed marriage, public humiliation, months of pain. Would things have been different if I'd handled the wedding situation differently? If I'd swallowed my pride, eaten in the kitchen, smiled and played along? Maybe. But then what would I have taught Brandon? That it's okay to accept disrespect, as long as you keep the peace. That a mother's dignity is worth less than social harmony. No, I'd done the right thing. I believe that. But right things can still hurt. That's what no one tells you about standing up for yourself. It doesn't feel triumphant. It feels lonely and scary and uncertain. The vindication, if it comes at all, comes later, sometimes much later, and sometimes it doesn't come at all. Sectary. Chapter 8. Reflection. Winter came to Boston with its usual harshness. I'd always loved winter. The stark beauty of it. The way the city looked under fresh snow. David used to joke that I loved winter because I was cold by nature, but he'd say it with a smile, knowing that beneath my professional armor, I was anything but cold. I missed him more during the holidays. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, all those times when families gather and you're acutely aware of who's missing. Brandon and I spent Thanksgiving together, just the two of us. We cooked. Well, I cooked and he helped, the way we used to when he was young. We watched football, talked about business, avoided discussing Sloan or the wedding or anything painful. It was nice, but it also highlighted what we'd lost. There should have been more people around that table. Grandchildren, maybe. A daughter-in-law I could share recipes with. David's booming laugh filling the apartment. Instead, it was just two people doing their best to pretend the emptiness wasn't there. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Brandon said as we cleared dishes. "Of course. Do you regret how you handled things at the wedding? Not morally, but practically. Would you do it differently if you could go back?" I thought about his question carefully. The toast itself? No. I stand by every word. But I regret that it had to happen at all. I regret that I didn't see the warning signs with Sloan earlier, that I didn't have a serious conversation with you before things got that far. I wouldn't have listened. I was too caught up in the fantasy of being part of their world. Maybe. Or maybe I could have found the right words. That's the burden of hindsight. It always shows you where you failed. You didn't fail, Mom. I failed. I chose status over family. That's on me. We both made mistakes. The important thing is we're here now, aren't we? But late that night, after Brandon had gone home, I wondered about his question. Would I do things differently? The truth was complicated. Part of me, the part that still woke up at 3 a.m., running through scenarios, thought maybe I should have been more strategic, pulled Brandon aside privately, built a case more carefully, not made it so publicly dramatic. But another part, the part that had lived 69 years in a world that constantly told women to be quieter, smaller, more accommodating, that part was glad I'd made a scene, glad I'd refused to slink away to the kitchen, glad I'd shown everyone that Beatrice Whitmore would not be diminished. Personal growth, I was learning, isn't always linear or comfortable. Sometimes you stand up for yourself and it works out beautifully. Sometimes you stand up for yourself and everything falls apart. And sometimes, most times, it's complicated. A mixture of vindication and regret, strength and vulnerability. In December, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Priscilla Fairchild, Sloane's mother. "Dear Beatrice, I'm writing to you privately, without my husband's or daughter's knowledge. I've spent considerable time reflecting on the events of this past year, and I believe I owe you an acknowledgement, if not quite an apology. You were correct in your assessment that we treated you dismissively. I convinced myself it was about maintaining traditions, about preserving a certain social order. But truthfully, it was about fear. Fear that your success, earned rather than inherited, exposed the hollowness of our own position. You built something. We simply maintained what others built for us. I don't expect forgiveness, and I certainly don't expect a relationship. But I wanted you to know that at least one member of the Fairchild family recognizes that you were in the right. I hope Brandon finds happiness. He's a better man than we deserve. Respectfully, Priscilla." I read the letter 3 times, surprised by its candor. It didn't change anything. The damage was done. The relationships fractured. But it was something. An acknowledgement that I hadn't been crazy, hadn't been oversensitive, hadn't been wrong. I didn't respond to the letter. Some things don't require a response. As the year drew to a close, I found myself taking stock of everything. Professionally, I'd never been more successful. Whitmore International had grown by 30%. The scholarship fund was thriving. I'd been named to several most powerful women lists. But personally, I was exhausted. The constant battle, the need to prove myself, the weight of always being on, it was taking its toll. On New Year's Eve, I did something I hadn't done in years. I stayed home alone. No party, no business function, no obligation to be Beatrice Whitmore, business titan. I poured a glass of champagne, stood on my balcony despite the cold, and watched fireworks bloom over the harbor. And I made myself a promise. This year, I would be kinder to myself. I would stop measuring my worth by my achievements. I would let myself be human, flawed, tired, uncertain. I would, perhaps for the first time in my life, simply be enough. Chapter 9. The Diagnosis. In February, I noticed something was wrong. Nothing dramatic, just unusual fatigue, some breathlessness when climbing stairs. I attributed it to age, to stress, to the harsh Boston winter. But when it persisted, Margaret insisted I see a doctor. The diagnosis came in March. Congestive heart failure. Not immediately life-threatening, the cardiologist assured me, but serious. My heart was weakening, struggling to pump blood effectively. How long? I asked Dr. Peterson, a woman about my age with kind eyes. With treatment, lifestyle changes, and some luck. Years, maybe a decade. But Beatrice, you need to slow down. The stress, the work schedule you're keeping, your heart can't handle it anymore. I run a company. I can't just stop. You need to decide what's more important, running a company or staying alive to enjoy what you've built. I told Brandon that evening. He went pale. Mom, you have to retire. Immediately. Sell the company, step back, focus on your health. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. Nothing else matters if you're not here. But he was wrong. It wasn't simple at all. The company was my identity, my purpose, my proof that I mattered. Without it, who was I? Just an old woman waiting to die. Over the next few weeks, I struggled with the decision. Dr. Peterson started me on medications and restrictions. No more 18-hour days, no more high-stress negotiations, more rest, better diet, regular exercise. It felt like being put in a cage. Miranda noticed the change immediately. You're distracted. What's going on? I told her. She cried, then pulled herself together with admirable efficiency. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to hire a CEO. Someone young and brilliant who can handle day-to-day operations while you transition to a board chairman role. You'll still be involved, still provide guidance, but without the killing pace. I don't know if I can do that. Let go. You don't have a choice. Your heart is giving you an ultimatum much clearer than Sloane ever did. Listen to it. She was right. Of course. Over the next month, we began the search for a new CEO. It was emotionally brutal, like admitting that I was mortal, that my time was running out, that the empire I'd built would continue without me. We found her in April. Her name was Dr. Keisha Williams, 42 years old, with an MBA from Harvard and a track record of successful turnarounds at 3 major companies. She was brilliant, strategic, and reminded me of myself 30 years ago. I'm not here to replace you, she told me in our first meeting. I'm here to carry forward what you've built. You'll always be the soul of this company, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm just the hands. I liked her immediately. The transition happened over the summer. Slowly, I taught Keisha everything. Not just the business operations, but the philosophy behind them. How to read people. How to know when to compromise and when to stand firm. How to be a woman in power without apologizing for it. It was like training my successor, and it hurt more than I expected. Brandon noticed the change in me. You seem sad. I'm letting go. That's always sad. But you're also taking care of yourself. That's wise. Wisdom and sadness aren't mutually exclusive. By September, Keisha was ready to take the reins. We announced the transition publicly. I would remain as chairman of the board, but Keisha would be CEO. The business press covered it extensively, most articles praising my graceful succession planning. graceful, as if I'd had a choice. The first week of not going to the office every day was disorienting. I woke up at 5 a.m., out of habit, then remembered I had nowhere to be. The hours stretched out, empty and accusing. What did people do with free time? How did they fill the void? I tried to stay busy. I increased my involvement with the scholarship fund. I started taking long walks along the Charles River. I even took an art class, something Margaret had been nagging me to do for years. But underneath all the activity was a gnawing sense of irrelevance. Without the company consuming my days, without the constant challenges and decisions, I felt like I was fading. "You're depressing," Margaret told me bluntly over coffee one day. "You've spent your whole life building and achieving, and now that you have time to actually enjoy life, you're moping around like you've been sentenced to death." And I have been sentenced to death. We all are. Mine just has a clearer timeline. Beatrice Whitmore, I've known you for almost 50 years, and I've never seen you be maudlin. Stop it. You're not dying tomorrow. You have years. Use them. To do what? To live, to travel, to laugh, to make new memories, to be something other than a businesswoman for the first time in 5 decades. Her words stung because they were true. I'd been Beatrice Whitmore, business titan, for so long that I didn't know how to be just Beatrice. That night, I looked through photo albums from when David was alive. There we were in Paris, laughing over wine at a sidewalk cafe. In Rome, posing in front of the Colosseum. In New Zealand, hiking through mountains that took our breath away. We'd had plans for retirement, places we wanted to see, experiences we wanted to share. Then he died, and I'd buried those dreams along with him. Maybe it was time to resurrect them. The next morning, I called a travel agent. I want to plan a trip, somewhere I've never been, somewhere meaningful. 3 weeks later, I was on a plane to Japan. Nevern, Chapter 10, Finding Peace. Japan in October was breathtaking. The autumn colors, the ancient temples, the strange and beautiful blend of tradition and modernity, it awakened something in me I thought had died. I spent 2 weeks traveling from Tokyo to Kyoto to rural villages. I stayed in traditional ryokans, soaked in hot springs, meditated in Buddhist temples. I didn't check my work email obsessively. I didn't call the office every day. For the first time in decades, I simply existed. One afternoon in Kyoto, I sat in a temple garden watching leaves fall into a koi pond. An elderly monk sat nearby, and we fell into conversation. His English was limited, my Japanese non-existent, but somehow we understood each other. "You carry much weight," he observed, gesturing to my shoulders. "I used to. I'm learning to put it down." "Difficult?" "Very," he smiled. "The heaviest burdens are the ones we choose to carry, also the easiest to release. We just open hands," he demonstrated, opening his palms and letting them rest on his knees. Such simple wisdom. Open your hands and let go. That evening, I wrote in the journal I'd been keeping. I've spent my whole life acquiring, building, proving. Now I need to learn the opposite, how to release, how to trust that what I built will continue without me, how to find value in simply being, rather than constantly doing. David understood this better than I did. He knew how to balance work and joy, achievement and peace. I wish he were here to teach me. When I returned to Boston in early November, I was different. Quieter, perhaps. More at peace with myself. Brandon noticed immediately. "Mom, you look rested, more yourself than you have in months." I think I'm finally learning who myself is without the armor of work and achievement. And who are you? I thought about his question. I'm still figuring that out. But I know I'm more than just my accomplishments. I'm the sum of my relationships, my experiences, my choices, good and bad. Over the next months, I settled into a new rhythm. I attended board meetings but let Keisha run the company. I spent more time with Brandon, building the relationship we'd nearly lost. I traveled, short trips, manageable ones, but adventures nonetheless. I even started dating, of all things. A retired professor named Robert whom I met at a lecture on Asian art. He was 71, widowed, with a gentle humor and no interest in my money or business success. We went to museums, attended concerts, had long dinners where we talked about books and ideas rather than deals and contracts. It wasn't romance, exactly. More like companionship. but it was nice not to be alone. Margaret approved. Look at you, actually enjoying life. I'm impressed. Don't be too impressed. I still wake up sometimes panicking that I'm not doing enough, being enough. Old habits die hard. But you're trying, and that's what matters. In March, a year after my diagnosis, Dr. Peterson ran tests and smiled. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Your heart function has actually improved. The medications are working. But more importantly, you're managing stress better. You might have bought yourself more time than we initially thought. More time. The phrase took on new meaning. Not more time to achieve or prove or build, but simply more time to live. That evening, Brandon came over for dinner. At 34, he was finally coming into his own, running a successful consulting firm, dating a kind woman named Claire who worked as a teacher, seemingly at peace with himself. Mom, I want to thank you. For what? For showing me, even when it hurt, that dignity matters. That standing up for yourself isn't selfish or dramatic. It's necessary. If you hadn't done what you did at the wedding, I'd probably still be married to Sloane, miserable and pretending otherwise. That's a generous interpretation. It's the truth. Yes, the way everything happened was painful. Yes, I wish it could have been different. But you taught me something crucial, that it's better to be alone with your integrity than surrounded by people who demand you sacrifice it. His words meant everything. But that night, after he left, I allowed myself to feel the sadness that lived underneath all the growth and healing. Because the truth was, standing up for myself had cost me. It had cost me months of peace with my son, had cost me the fantasy of a happy extended family, had revealed truths about people I'd hoped weren't true. And while I'd do it again, would make the same choice to defend my dignity, I could mourn what was lost. Both things could be true. I could be strong and sad, vindicated and grieving. That was the complexity of real life, of real growth. It wasn't neat or simple or triumphant. It was messy and complicated and bittersweet, and that was okay. Chapter 11. Legacy. 2 years after the wedding, I received an invitation to speak at a women's business conference. The theme was Authentic Leadership in a Changing World. I almost declined. Public speaking had never been my favorite aspect of business, but the organizer was persistent, and finally I agreed. The auditorium held 500 women, ranging in age from 20s to 80s. As I walked onto the stage, I felt a familiar flutter of nervousness, but also, for the first time, a sense of peace. I wasn't here to prove anything, just to share what I'd learned. 2 years ago, I began. I did something that changed my life. I stood up for myself in a very public, very dramatic way. Many of you saw the video. Some of you probably thought I was brave. Some thought I was cruel. Some thought I was having a breakdown. Nervous laughter from the audience. The truth is, I was all of those things. I was brave and scared, strong and vulnerable, certain and completely terrified, because that's what happens when you stop performing and start being real. I talked for 40 minutes. Not about business strategies or leadership principles, but about being human, about the cost of constantly achieving, about learning, at 69 years old, that your worth isn't measured by your productivity. I've built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, I said. I've closed deals on 3 continents. I've been called powerful, influential, successful, and all of that is true. But you know what I'm most proud of? Learning to value myself even when I'm not achieving anything. Learning that Beatrice, without the company, without the accomplishments, is still worthy of respect and love. The standing ovation was unexpected. But more meaningful were the conversations afterward. Woman after woman approached me, sharing their own stories of having enough, of setting boundaries, of choosing dignity over peace at any cost. One woman, maybe 55, gripped my hands and said, "Thank you for giving me permission to stop apologizing for taking up space." That phrase stuck with me, taking up space, as if our very existence required justification. In April, Brandon called with news. My mom, Claire, and I are engaged. We want to do something small, just close friends and family. Would you help us plan it? I'd be honored. And Brandon, I'm so happy for you. Claire is wonderful. She is. And Mom, she wants to meet with you, to ask for your blessing, she says, though I told her that's old-fashioned. But she insists. Claire came to my apartment the following week. She was 36, with warm brown eyes and an easiness about her that immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Whitmore, I wanted to talk to you before the wedding. I know what happened at Brandon's first wedding, and I want you to know that will never happen with me. You're his mother. You'll always be important. And I hope, in time, you'll become important to me too." Such simple words. Such profound respect. "Claire, call me Beatrice. And thank you. That means more than you know. Brandon's told me everything. About Sloan, about the note, about how you stood up for yourself. I want you to know. I think you did the right thing. Sometimes love means drawing hard lines." Their wedding was in June, exactly 2 years after the disastrous first one. It was small, just 30 people, in a garden outside Boston. I sat in the front row, where mothers of grooms belong. I gave a toast, brief and heartfelt, welcoming Claire into our family. It was everything the first wedding wasn't. Warm, genuine, joyful. As I watched Brandon and Claire dance, I felt David's presence so strongly. He would have loved this, would have loved Claire, would have been proud of how Brandon had grown. "We did okay, didn't we?" I whispered to the sky. Our boy turned out all right. That fall, Keisha approached me with a proposition. "The company is doing well, really well. We're about to close our biggest deal ever, a merger with a European logistics firm. It will make us one of the top 3 companies in our sector globally." "That's wonderful, Keisha. You've done an incredible job. I couldn't have done it without the foundation you built, which is why I want to announce something at the shareholder meeting. I want to rename the company in honor of you and David, Whitmore International, or maybe Whitmore Legacy Holdings, something that acknowledges what you both created." Tears stung my eyes. "Keisha, I don't know what to say. Say yes. Your story, your partnership with David, the way you turned grief into growth, it's inspiring. It should be remembered." So it was decided. At the annual shareholder meeting in October, the company was officially renamed Whitmore Legacy International. They unveiled a plaque in the lobby with photos of David and me from our early days, alongside a quote I'd given in an interview: "Real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the impact you have, the relationships you nurture, and the dignity you maintain even when it costs you everything." Standing there, looking at that plaque, I felt a sense of completion. The business would continue long after I was gone. David's and my names would be attached to something meaningful. Our work, our sacrifices, our love. It would endure. That evening, Margaret hosted a small dinner party to celebrate. Brandon and Claire, Robert, Miranda, Keisha, Theodore, Dr. Peterson, and a few other close friends. It was intimate and perfect. As we raised our glasses for a toast, Margaret said, "To Beatrice, who taught us all that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about how you rebuild." Later, as people were leaving, Brandon pulled me aside. "Mom, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you fought for yourself, even when it meant fighting against me, because it taught me what real love looks like. It doesn't demand that you make yourself smaller. It celebrates you as you are. Your father taught me that, years ago. I just forgot for a while. I'm glad I remembered." That night, lying in bed, I thought about the journey of the past 2 years, from that devastating wedding to this moment of peace. It hadn't been linear or easy. There had been pain and loss and difficulty, but I'd learned something crucial. Standing up for yourself is rarely simple or clean. It's complicated and messy, and sometimes costs you things you value. But the alternative, shrinking, accepting disrespect, betraying yourself to keep the peace, that costs more. It costs your soul. I chose to keep my soul. Everything else was negotiable. Ashtin, Chapter 12, Endings and Beginnings. In November, 3 years after the wedding that changed everything, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Sloan. "Dear Beatrice, I'm writing this letter knowing you may not read it, and if you do, you'll probably throw it away. I wouldn't blame you. I've spent the past 3 years in therapy, unpacking why I behaved the way I did. It's not an excuse, but perhaps an explanation. I was raised to believe that worth came from status, that my value as a person was tied to my family name and social position. When I married Brandon, I saw him as a step down, and I projected that insecurity onto you, treating you as lesser to make myself feel superior. The note I sent you at the wedding was cruel and inexcusable. I know that now. I knew it then, but I'd convinced myself it was justified, that you needed to understand your place in our world. I was wrong. Profoundly, inexcusably wrong. Your response humiliated me, yes, but more importantly, it shattered the worldview I'd been operating under. You showed me that real power comes from character, from building something meaningful, from maintaining your dignity even when it cost you. Everything I'd been raised to believe was valuable, old money, social position, family legacy, crumbled in the face of your genuine accomplishment and self-respect. I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. I'm working at a domestic violence shelter now, trying to use my privilege for something meaningful rather than just maintaining it. It's humbling and difficult, and nothing like the life I'd planned. But it's real, like you were real at that wedding, refusing to be diminished. Thank you for that lesson, even though I learned it the hard way. Respectfully, Sloane. I read the letter 3 times, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Anger at what she'd done, sadness for everyone involved, surprise at her apparent growth, and finally, something like compassion. People could change. Not always, not easily, but sometimes, and maybe that was enough. I didn't respond to the letter, but I didn't throw it away either. I filed it in a drawer, an artifact of a painful chapter that had, at least, led to growth for everyone involved. In December, Dr. Peterson had me come in for my regular checkup. After running tests, she smiled. Your heart function continues to improve. I'm amazed, honestly. You've added years to your life through stress reduction and lifestyle changes. Keep doing what you're doing. How many years? I asked. Impossible to say for certain. But Beatrice, you might outlive me. Walking out of her office, I felt simultaneously grateful and wistful. More time was a gift, but it was also a responsibility. What would I do with it? That evening, I sat on my balcony despite the cold, wrapped in David's old sweater that I'd kept all these years. Brandon and Claire had just told me they were expecting a baby, my first grandchild, due in June. The news filled me with a joy so profound it was almost painful. A grandchild, new life, new beginnings. Maybe that was the answer to what I'd do with my remaining time. But as I sat there, I also allowed myself to feel the grief that lived alongside the joy. Grief for David, who would never meet his grandchild. Grief for the years lost to overwork and armor and proving myself. Grief for the simplicity I'd never have again. The innocence lost when I realized that even family could betray you. That was the truth no one tells you about getting older. You carry more. More memories, more losses, more complicated emotions. Life doesn't get simpler. It gets richer and heavier and more textured. And you learn that happy endings don't exist. There are just endings, some better than others, most bittersweet. On Christmas Eve, Brandon and Claire came over. We cooked together, laughed over old stories, made plans for the baby's nursery. Robert joined us for dinner, fitting easily into our small family unit. As we sat around the table, Brandon raised his glass to Mom, who taught me that you can't build a life worth living on someone else's approval. You have to build it on your own values, your own dignity, your own terms. Even when it's hard, Claire added. Especially when it's hard, I corrected. After dinner, Brandon and I stood on the balcony, watching snow begin to fall over Boston. Mom, are you happy? He asked. Such a simple question. Such a complicated answer. I'm content, I said finally. I've learned that happiness is too ephemeral to chase. Contentment, the sense that you're living according to your values, that you've maintained your integrity, that you're at peace with your choices, that's more sustainable. Do you regret what happened? The wedding, the confrontation, everything? I thought carefully before answering. I regret the necessity of it. I regret that Sloane felt entitled to treat me that way, that you were caught in the middle, that we all lost time to conflict that should have been spent on joy. But do I regret standing up for myself? No, never, because that moment taught me something crucial. I'd rather be alone with my dignity than surrounded by people who require me to abandon it. But you're not alone, Mom. You have me. You have Claire and soon a grandchild. You have friends, a business legacy, a life rich with meaning. I do, and I'm grateful for all of it. But I also need you to understand something. Even if I had none of that, even if standing up for myself had cost me everything, even you, I'd still do it. Because at the end of our lives, we have to live with ourselves. And I refuse to live with a version of Beatrice Whitmore who accepted being treated as less than she is. Snow continued to fall, coating the city in white. In the distance, church bells rang for Christmas Eve services. Your father would be proud of both of us, I said quietly. We've both learned, in our different ways, that the only life worth living is an authentic one. We stood in comfortable silence, father and son bound by love and respect and hard-won understanding. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I opened my journal and wrote,